So, you might have grown up hearing that it's not polite to talk about religion or politics with friends and family. Is this correct? Anyone heard this? And it's an obvious reason. People have strong beliefs on both, and oftentimes things might end up in arguing. You might even have heard, well, you don't change anyone's mind anyway, so what's the point in arguing? Which I do think is a little bit sad, because should we not always be learning and growing as people? And so to be firmly held in your wonderful beliefs so much that you couldn't hear new information, to me is a little sad. So if you look at our culture, you would realize we're not very good at speaking to each other when we have different points of view. Would you agree with that? This is not modeled very well. The problem that we have in our culture isn't so much that we shouldn't talk about politics and religion, it's that we don't know how. We've never learned the skills, and we do not see it modeled, how to speak to one another in a respectful way that can potentially have both parties more enlightened than they were before. Regarding almost any subject on the planet, I can say my knowledge is incomplete. Would you say that as well? And yet also we are trained in our culture to have opinions about absolutely everything, whether we have a lot of information or not. And so what a benefit if we actually learn the skills of being curious and being open to new information together. So I'm going to bring Danielle up, and we are going to model a very typical and poorly done conversation. Oh, hey, Danielle, I'm just getting some milk here for my coffee. Just, there we go.
Oh. You're drinking cow's milk?
Yeah.
What?
You're drinking oat milk. That's so woke.
No, it's not woke. Have you watched the Rotten documentary? Did you hear about the Fairlife cows and how they were stuck in pens and sick, and how much hormones they put in those things?
Are you just anti-farmer and anti-dairy, and that's the backbone of our country? I just can't believe that you're turning against that.
I can't believe you would just not have any information about these important
things. Are you calling me ignorant?
Yes.
Do you get your information every week from Biden in a newsletter telling you what to think? I can't believe it.
Gosh, you're so ignorant.
Oh my gosh, forget it. I'm out of here. Okay, so what did we do wrong? Almost everything. If you notice, we made a lot of instant assumptions and accusations toward each other. We had 0 questions except rude ones we never expected the other one to answer. And we did not actually listen. We didn't even share from our own experience. If this is our only model of talking about things when we get triggered, then we will never be able to communicate or understand each other. Right now, when we look on television on almost any subject, we will see people who behave in this way. They talk over each other, they accuse each other, they make a lot of assumptions, and nobody benefits or learns anything because no one wants to learn. It's a very ungenerous way of thinking about each other. Often there's no empathy, there's no listening, and there's a lot of demonizing. Danielle and I may have walked away from that conversation thinking worse of each other, as well as trying to lump the other person into some pigeonhole without actually knowing anything about what the other person thinks and feels. So we're going to do this again, engaging basic ideas of respectful conversations. And to keep it easy, it's really just 2. One is you speak for yourself. You speak from your own life experience, from your own perspective and feelings. And the second is you listen deeply. You try to suspend judgment for a moment, and instead of thinking of a comeback when the other person's talking, you try to understand what they're saying. And if they were generalizing, you can always ask them to speak from their own experience. and just see how this plays out differently.
Oh,
Oh, hey, Danielle, just getting
Siri.
some milk.
Oh, yeah, I'm gonna get my milk.
Oh,
Oh, you're drinking cow's milk?
yeah. I don't know. I always like it. And my uncle, he was a dairy farmer, and I would go and visit him every summer. And it was some of the best memories of my childhood. And I loved those animals. And so I always have a good feeling like I'm supporting the farmers like my uncle when I drink milk.
Oh, that's really sweet. I've only been just watching those documentaries about like all the growth hormones and those little pens,
Okay.
but like I didn't know that there was actually people that like treated their cows well.
Oh, yeah. I loved all those little animals. It was a smaller farm with lots of different animals, but it was great experience.
Oh, that's so awesome! Like you're supporting local farmers like your uncle.
That's how I see it, but why do you drink oat milk? That feels like kind of like a new fad thing, but why do you drink it?
It's not a fad. It's actually really delicious. It's so creamy.
Oh, I haven't tried it.
Yeah, the taste is amazing. And I'm lactose intolerant, so this
Oh, I
oat
didn't know
milk
that.
really is just so much better for my stomach. It's so much easier to digest, and it's good for the planet. I feel.
Huh. I've never tried it. That's interesting, but
Yeah, no, you should try it sometime.
I learned something today. So,
Yeah.
well, enjoy your coffee.
Yeah, and enjoy your coffee too.
Maybe we'll have coffee sometime.
Yeah, let's catch up
Okay.
again.
All right.
Okay.
Bye. So that went very differently, didn't it? And did you notice what was the difference? We both began to tell stories from our own experience and our own life. We shared our own feelings without generalizing or accusing the other. We asked questions and we waited to see what the answer was. And in the end, did we agree? Did we switch our milks? No. But we had an understanding, a deeper understanding that might have shattered some of the preconceived notions that we had. The reason I bring this up is because as we're talking about our mission statement, and we're talking about building peace in this world, as I've said often, it is a beautiful sentiment, but then we need the tools to figure out how to make it real on earth. And the tools are not always just out there in the culture. Sometimes we have to practice them. And practicing respectful communications, it literally is that, a practice. You're not going to do it perfect right away. But one thing might be if you're having a conversation with a person and you feel yourself getting like tight, they bring up a subject and you're instantly like, oh no. Hopefully you didn't all have strong feelings about milk. We tried to pick something that was going to be, but we could have probably picked a subject that would have made you all go, oh no. And there's so many of that out there. And so immediately one of the first things you can think is, speak for myself. What in my experience? And feel free to ask people, what in your experience? Immediately when people start talking from their own life, everything just de-escalates and gets calmer. Yesterday, I was at one of the Isaiah listening sessions that we had here in Bloomington, and I noticed that the very first question that we were asked by a facilitator was, what in your own life or the life of the people whom you love, what issues come to mind that if they were resolved would make your life better? And we went around the room and we just shared personal stories, and at the end of the meeting, I thought, no one got upset with anybody as we were talking, because how can you argue with someone's concern for their child? How can you argue with someone's concern for their aging parent? You can't. It was a beautiful conversation where we ended up having more empathy for where other people were in their life stage. The story that Jesus tells may seem like an odd one to pair with this. But Jesus is talking about how in God's reality, in God's kingdom, and God's way of doing things, there is a generosity of thought and action. And here's something you may not have known that I learned recently, was this is a landowner of a vineyard. And apparently, you can correct me if I'm wrong, when the grapes are ready in a vineyard, they need to be harvested now. So you do not want to let them hang on the vine for too long or they will rot and it will be wasted. So, one way to look at this story is the landowner saw that the grapes were ready and went out early in the morning to where there were people waiting as day laborers to be hired. And he went up and he said, "What's the normal daily wage that you would accept for working all day harvesting my grapes?" And they said, $100. Absolutely, that works for me. I'll give you $100 for working all day in the hot sun harvesting the grapes. They came, started working. A couple hours later, the landowner looks and goes, "This is not going to be enough. I need more. We're going to get to the end of the day and it's not going to be close to done." Goes and picks up a few more people, sets them to work. And the goal of the landowner is to have all the grapes harvested. And so throughout the day, he continues to employ more and more people. And at the end of the day, he's happy because his grapes have been harvested. And then, out of generosity and care for these workers and gratitude for them, gave them all the same daily wage. Now, one way to look at this story is that while you notice that people who worked all day thought they should get more, because it wasn't fair that someone who worked 1 hour got the same wage as someone who worked 12 possibly. The people who were picked up first had no anxiety in the day whether they were going to feed their family that night, because they were working and they'd been hired and they knew they were going to go home with money in their pocket. The people who were hired at 5 o'clock spent that whole day in anxiety, wondering if they were going to have food to put on their table. And because of the landowner's generosity, everybody went home that day proud and happy. Is that not great? That is a generous landowner who sees the big picture and values not just the crop, but values human life and community. That is how God sees the world. And yet we have been trained in this world to see things in a very narrow way. And we often think about fairness and what's best for me, and we judge and we accuse and we see things in a small way. And I believe Jesus was trying with all his parables to change people's mind to a generous way of thinking, one that really looks for the welfare of others. But then when we engage in a conversation, especially about hard things, how could we be generous by assuming that this person with a different point of view is not a horrible human being, but rather somebody who may be afraid, or somebody whose life experience is very different from ours, and they have a perspective we might be able to learn from, or at least we can have more empathy for their point of view, even if we don't agree with them. So as we seek to build peace in this world, it is really hard practicing respectful conversations. And there's one more piece that I will add, because oftentimes in our personal lives, with the people we live with, we may have moments in which things get heated. And I call this practicing compassionate confrontation. Even with the people closest to us, they might say, "You always leave the dishes in the sink." Well, now that's just a great way to get a fight started, right? And yet a better way, and this is all in your bulletin, when you leave the dishes in the sink, it makes me feel as if you think I should be cleaning up after you. Does that hit different? That's a conversation opener rather than an argument starter. And this is a practice. We are not going to naturally do any of these things. We're not going to instantly be the best at communicating. But when we build peace in this world and learn to think in a more generous way, the way Jesus was trying to teach people, learning these respectful conversations and compassionate confrontation can be a way to continue to build peace and relationships in this world. And what a beautiful thing is if we as followers of Jesus can model that for the rest of the world and show another way to do things. So I offer those for you to practice, to play with, to meditate on. And remember, practice is not perfection. We are going to do this poorly, and God has a lot of generous grace for us as we learn a better way to be together. Amen.